Okay, I guess we're ready to go. We've got a few people filtering in, but I think we have people on the, several hundred people on the phone, so I'm going to start on time. I'm going to make a presentation, and then I'm going to invite our nominees out. We're going to have an open Q&A, both people on the telephone, or actually not on the telephone, but by email can send in their questions, and also we'll take questions from people in the room. Okay. To begin, we're going to take you to the present, how we got involved in Target, how we got to where we are now, why we think board change at the company is warranted. We're going to introduce you to our nominees, and we're going to talk about Target's case for preserving the existing board, and we're going to talk about corporate elections generally and shareholders' choice. So, background. We're a long-term Target shareholder, been a shareholder since April of 2007. We're the third largest holder of the company. If you ignore the stock options we own, we're the fourth largest holder of Target. We have over $1 billion of common stock in the company, about 24.8 million shares, and it's by far the largest investment in our portfolio. We started accumulating stock in April, and what we saw in Target is a company in three principal businesses. Retail, obviously, credit cards, with a major real estate ownership stake. We had our first meeting with the company August 2nd of 2007 after filing a 13D. We met with Greg Steinhoffel and Doug Scovanner. We made a presentation that was entitled Part 1, and Part 1 referred to the fact that we were going to make a subsequent presentation about real estate, but we thought it made sense to start with credit. And we made an 85-page presentation about Target's credit card business and what the opportunities were for them to stay in the credit card business, but outsource the risk associated with that business and both funding risk and credit risk. In September, Target hired Goldman Sachs to look at alternatives for their credit card business. And then in December, we made two presentations to the company. And the presentations emphasized how important it was for Target to exit not just the funding risk associated with the transaction, but also the credit risk associated with that business. We've filed one of those presentations. We're going to file the second presentation. Target recently has been saying that we were supportive of the way they structured the credit card transaction. While we were supportive of what they ultimately did with JP Morgan, we were not supportive of the fact that they didn't do what we had originally asked for, which was not just a funding outsourcing, but a credit risk transfer. In May, Target announced the JP Morgan deal, and as I mentioned, it was a positive in that the company took some risk off the table as the capital markets got more difficult. It was a negative in that the company kept effectively all of the credit risk with that business. Stock buybacks. We advocated to Target, we met with them in August, they should sell the credit card business, take that capital, and redeploy it back into share repurchases. We were comfortable with the company buying back stock, having outsourced the credit risk associated with that business. Once they did a funding transaction, but kept the credit risk, we were less comfortable with a large buyback program. In May, after the announcement of the credit card transaction, we talked to Target about real estate. And our view is we think there's a significant opportunity in Target real estate, and we had a particular idea for a potential transaction. We met with Greg and Doug. We had a very positive meeting. At the meeting, Greg said to us, this is an interesting idea. It does seem to solve our concern about continuing to control our buildings. Why hasn't anyone done it? And I said, well, I think no one's done it because they hadn't thought of it before, but we'd love to talk to you further about it. The company hired Goldman Sachs to take a look at real estate. We met with the company and Goldman Sachs in July to go through their analysis. And again, a very favorable meeting. By September, Fannie, Freddie, AIG, the credit markets had deteriorated very dramatically, and the board had gone, I would say, from the company's initial interest, being quite interested, to very lukewarm about our transaction, and expressed concerns because our initial TIP-RE transaction would cause a credit rating downgrade. In the fall, we expressed concern to Target about the pace of their share buyback program in light of what was going on in the capital markets generally, in light of the fact that the company still retained credit risk associated with its transaction. In October, we went public with our transaction. Please come in and have a seat. The reason why we decided to go public is we wanted to get shareholder feedback on what we called a TIP for Target, which was our proposed real estate transaction. We announced it publicly. I made a presentation in this room. The company came back with a list of concerns. We met with shareholders, and then we presented a revised transaction in November. Within 48 hours, the company again turned us down, and if you remember, this was probably the worst month in Target's history, a down 10% comp. The company really needed to focus on its business. We even got the sense that we were a distraction to the company, certainly in the short term, while it had very important strategic, not just strategic, but core operating issues for the company to focus on. We deferred discussing the transactions with the company until the turn of the year. In February, the company suggested that we meet with Goldman Sachs. This was after a meeting with Doug and Greg in which we reviewed the revised transaction. They thought it was interesting enough to present to Goldman Sachs. They suggested we may have addressed the rating concern, although they had not yet met with the rating agencies. But they said, look, you've got to get Goldman Sachs to the point where they believe this creates as much value as you do, because we don't think it makes sense unless there's a real increase in valuation. We had a detailed meeting with Goldman Sachs. They presented to us kind of a summary of the transaction as they presented it to the board of Target. And it became very clear to us at that meeting that there was a disconnect in terms of how we viewed the transaction, how the company viewed the transaction. We asked Target, we said, look, we're not sure whether our plan is the right idea for Target. What we do think is likely is that there's an opportunity to create value in this portfolio of real estate assets. Other companies have different structures. We'd like to explore this issue further with Goldman Sachs. What we'd love to do is have an iterative discussion with Goldman Sachs where we can work together and figure out what's best for shareholders. The company informed us that the board had not authorized Goldman Sachs to further explore any potential real estate transactions, and they flat out turned us down. I then said, well, look, if this can't happen from outside the company, is there a way where we can become part of the discussion? And I proposed that I join the board, and I said perhaps another independent director that is mutually acceptable to us and to the company. And the company informed us that they had a very independent nominating process and that they'd put us into that process. In February, we meet with the nominating committee. I meet Steve Sanger, who chairs the committee. Very pleasant meeting. Spent an hour together. I introduced Matt Paul as a potential director candidate. Now, prior to Matt meeting the nominating committee, he sent in his resume, which lists the fact that he's on the board of Best Buy. And we say, look, if this is a problem, please let us know. Again, we have a meeting with Matt has a meeting with the nominating committee. The company comes back and says, well, Matt Paul really can't qualify because of the fact he's on the board of Best Buy. Do you have any other suggestions for directors? At which point we started looking for alternative directors. We found Richard Vague, a former credit card industry executive. We proposed him. We identified Michael Ashner, a well-regarded real estate investor. We proposed Michael, again, focusing on people that we thought would bring relevant experience to the board. Within a week or so, the chairman of the nominating committee called me back and said, you know what, Bill, the nominating committee has met. We've considered your candidates, and we've decided to reject all of them. And I said, well, why? And he said, the board has not authorized me to give you a reason. Now, the board and the nominating committee never met or spoke with two of our nominees, Richard Vague and Michael Ashner. And I guess the concern we had at this point is the board does not really seem receptive to outside directors, and we decided at this point that we had no choice but to seek approval from shareholders. We announced our slate, and what we focused on is filling out elements of the board that we think are missing. We ran an independent slate. All 5 of the directors we proposed are independent of Target. 4 of the 5 are independent of Pershing Square. I met the majority of them quite recently. Only Michael Ashner is someone I've known for some time. We think the board lacks expertise in the core business. There's no retailer on the board. There's no credit card industry executive. There's no real estate executive. And also we think that the board has made some corporate governance errors and that they would benefit by one of the top corporate governance experts in the country. Our goal, if we can improve the board, we think we can make this a better company. Now, why is board change warranted? If you look at the composition of the board, we think the best board has a balance of both general business expertise, and I think here Target gets an excellent grade in terms of their board, but they also need to have specific expertise. Again, please come in and have a seat. We'll be here for a while. You'll be better off as opposed to standing. Plenty of seats up front.